Dr Sarah Caddy, who is a virologist at Cambridge University. Sarah, what is a virus?
So in the simplest terms, a virus is a piece of DNA or potentially RNA that is surrounded by a protein shell. And that's it, that's all we're talking about. But lots of viruses have evolved to be slightly clever in that, slightly more complicated. So some will also have a membrane around the outside. Some will have lots of proteins around sticking in the membrane around the outside. And sometimes the DNA and the RNA, it's not like human DNA and RNA, it's their own special kind. So put this all together and you can have things as diverse as HIV and flu viruses. Essentially, they're all DNA with a protein coat.
That sounds like it's a very, very simple thing. Why is it so difficult for us to treat viruses and stop them infecting us?
So viruses, although simple, are very, very clever. They're very, very good at hiding from the immune response. So once they get into the body, they manage to hide away from all of the cells that normally would target an infection and destroy it. Viruses can hide and they can also change or mutate. They are able to evolve as an infection progresses or in between different hosts so that they can avoid being recognised by immune response and potentially avoid being recognised by any drugs that are introduced.
What is it that makes them so good at hiding from our immune system?
So basically, millennia of evolution, they have evolved with humans, with other species. So they're very good at looking quite similar to us, but having subtle differences. The human immune response and all immune responses don't want to destroy themselves. That leads to autoimmune diseases. So viruses often have evolved to look a little bit like them so that they can't be seen.
They're also really, really tiny, aren't they, compared to our cells?
That's right.
How small are they?
So there's a range, as with everything. The tiniest virus could be looking at 20 nanometers is a number, but basically that's 20 times 10 to the 9 or minus 9, so much more than you could see with the naked eye. But some viruses have been identified recently that are almost as big as your average bacteria. So there is quite a spectrum.
What is the difference between a bacteria and a virus? Because they can both infect us and cause nasty things. What are the big differences?
So bacteria are more complicated. They are able to replicate outside a cell, most species are, whereas a virus has to get inside a cell, a human cell, a dog cell, whatever kind of cell, to hijack the cell processing machinery or the replication machinery of a cell to replicate. A bacteria can be outside in a pond, for example, and replicate there by itself. So bacteria have a more complicated genome. They are able to encode their own replication systems.
So a virus really can't exist outside of a host, whether that's us or an animal or something else.
So they can sit in the environment and do nothing. They can often stable for weeks, if not months and years, but they won't replicate.
Can you talk me through the process from becoming infected with a virus? What's actually going on inside your body?
So I guess if we take it from the stage when a virus has managed to get into your body and it's not in a cell yet, but it's going around, the virus will be waiting until it meets the cell which it is adapted to interact with. So a virus has receptors on it has proteins on its surface that will bind to specific components of specific cells. And then when they bind, the virus can then enter the cell. And inside the cell, often it looks a little bit like an ordinary component of a human cell, so the human immune response doesn't recognise it. And then, depending on what type of virus it is, it may enter the nucleus, it may stay in the cytoplasm, but it then uses the protein and nucleic acid machinery to make its own proteins, to make its own genome. And then often it bursts out the cell, killing the cell in the process.
And is that what makes you feel ill, the fact that it's killing your cells?
So again, there's so many different types of viruses and they all do it slightly different ways. Sometimes it is the fact they burst out and that cell is then no more that causes the problems, but sometimes it's your immune response actually destroying things as well and causing you to feel unwell. So often it's a balance between the virus doing injury to yourself and your own immune response injuring yourself.
So if you've got the common cold, for example, the sneezing and the runny nose and the stuffed up sinuses, that's all your immune response trying to get rid of the virus.
Exactly, yes.
Why don't we have treatments for them in the same way that we have antibiotics that can treat bacteria? If I've got a really awful cold and I go to the doctor, there's nothing they can do.
No, that's absolutely right. So partly it's because there are so many different kinds of viruses. So the common cold can be caused by 5 or 6 different types of viruses, and each of those viruses has many different subtypes. And so even if we developed one drug to target one subtype, it wouldn't help against all the others. And viruses can mutate very quickly, so chances are if you have a good drug, they will find a way to hide from that drug or to destroy that drug, so then they wouldn't be responsive to it.
If we can't develop drugs to treat viruses, what are the kind of frontiers? What are the best methods, do we think, in the future of treating viruses?
So vaccination has been a cornerstone of virus control. The idea being if you can inject a person with a tiny bit of a virus or a dead virus that isn't going to cause disease, you can then stimulate the body to generate an immune response to this pretend virus. And that means that later on down the line, if you see the virus, if I get infected with the virus, your immune response is already ready, it's already primed. It's then going to recognise it and destroy the virus before it sets up an infection. So that's kind of the key goal of lots of research, is to try and develop good vaccines to all viruses that we know. But unfortunately, it's obviously not as easy as that.
So for the flu vaccine, for example, you have to go and get it every year. Is that due to this thing about the viruses being able to mutate?
Exactly, yes. Flu is very good at mutating, and basically what happens is an epidemic one year, or lots of flu cases one year, the next year the viruses won't be able to infect the same population of people because they'll have an immune response to it. So the virus mutates away, so it won't be recognised the same way. And that means, to be a step ahead of the game, you have to be vaccinated each year with the new strain to stop being susceptible.
How do you know what strain the virus is going to mutate into to be able to create the vaccine?
That's a very good question. And actually, it's often a guessing game. Partly we're helped by the fact that the world has seasons, and flu is typically a winter virus, and obviously in Australia that's 6 months ahead or behind, whichever way you look at it, to us. So you can kind of track it around the world, and that can help predict. But of course sometimes scientists get it slightly wrong, and that's sometimes reasons why the flu vaccine may be not as effective one year as it was the previous year. So it's all a guessing game, but many different factors come into play when deciding what goes into the next year's vaccine.
Are there any other things you can use to treat viruses? I'm thinking of HIV, for example. There are drugs that are given now, aren't there?
Yes, I mean HIV is a really good example of a virus that actually scientists have developed an amazing array of drugs to treat it. And the problem with HIV, it's fantastic at avoiding immune responses and hiding from drugs. But if you target HIV with multiple different drugs that look at different aspects of the virus, altogether you can hold it at bay. Now, there are no drugs at the moment that completely can get rid of HIV, but if you have all these drugs coming from different angles, you can then potentially keep the virus at bay for decades. People with HIV can live reasonably normal lifespans now.
But they still can't actually get rid of it and be back to being HIV negative.
At the moment, as it stands at the moment, that's absolutely right. We can't completely say we eradicated it in most cases. The drugs can't achieve that at the moment. So that would be the holy grail of HIV research.
Do you think it will ever be possible to develop a drug that can completely eradicate something like HIV?
That's a very good question. I would like to say yes. However, I think potentially a better approach would be to develop vaccines for HIV. And of course, there's many vaccines that have been tried and tested in clinical trials for HIV, but at present, there is not a leading candidate that has been shown to be effective. Think of smallpox, for example. That wasn't eradicated because we had great drugs. It's eradicated because of a great vaccine. If you vaccinate the whole world, suddenly there's nowhere for the virus to go and it will go extinct. And obviously that would be fantastic for HIV.
Fingers crossed. Thanks so much.